What were the early 2000s like? Here's how to replicate the 2000s experience. Take every bit of content in your Netflix and Spotify history. Now find a friend who actually had cable, internet, who has amassed all this content on a collection of portable hard drives. Buy a 50 stack of rewritable CDs and the same in DVDs. Burn all your content onto those discs. Don't put any of it in cases because the discs were 10c each but cases were $1. Don't label any of it because you lost the special marker. Now spread those unlabeled discs through your home and your car. You're going to get starkly different answers from people who were kids in the O and those who weren't. For the latter, it's the decade where everything changed. I was in my early 20s to 30 in the O. Pop culture-wise, I don't see them as terribly different, to be honest. It was all there in an earlier form. PS2, PS3 instead of PS5, Real Player instead of Zoom or Duo, downloading movies instead of Netflix, sharing music instead of Apple Music, and sure, smartphones weren't a thing, but cell phones and texting were extremely common, and the internet had been graphical for over 15 years by 2010. Huge internet chapters like Napster and the New Digital Act had already come and gone. If there's anything different, I'd say internet dating was still considered kinda nerdy in the early O. Pop culture-wise, today is a sleek version of back then. Everything runs faster and is more intuitive. On a global scale though, as cliché as it is, everything changed after 9/11. It still seems strange to me that anyone under the age of 25 have always had terrorism, extremist, and incredible political divides as just a normal part of daily life. And while some areas of the world have always known those things, most developed countries have been shielded from that kind of talk for decades. Once that started, it has persisted until today, if not it's become more normal. And watching the global community respond to a world that's instantly connected and wired together has been frightening to watch. The spread of pseudoscience, people's beliefs switching on a dime according to their feelings, basically the rise and acceptance of the if anything, that's the most vivid difference now compared to back then. I was 10 in the 2000s. It was awesome. A simpler time. Didn't really go onto social media until 2005. That was MySpace time. But yeah, you hung out with your friends by them knocking on the door, you hung out with your neighbors. Or you would call them on the phone. Usually after 9, haha. 'Cause it was free to call them. Or you used the house phone. I remember watching shows like Kablam, All That, The Amanda Show. Time flies. Office Space 1999, and Idiocracy 2006 helped me cope through several 9-to-5 grinds. Lots of prank calls, bikes on neighbors' lawns, manhunt, burning music onto CDs, bootcut jeans, folding sweat socks to makeshift ankle socks, lots of white Air Force Ones, Avril Lavigne's Complicated, MASH, passing notes in class, gel pens, gel sandals, blisters, blow-up furniture, waiting turns to go on the swings, a sense of stability and fulfillment that we were all blissfully unaware we had that we will never be able to attain again. Slightly smiling face. There was a lot of clothing that was hot pink and black. There were Dorina's pants, which are worth Googling. I didn't know what culture was. When people yelled, "Slut," out of the car window at me and my friends, we would push each other and say, "You're the slut," "No, you're the slut," at each other playfully. I waited on MSN until the boy I liked logged in, and then I would talk to him about nothing at all. People used and as insults. My sisters listened to a lot of Ashanti and Ja Rule. I was listening to the Atari's CD on repeat. I thought Good Charlotte was for posers. There was an unreal amount of reality TV. We rented movies on the weekend. I remember a lot more people being outside, like going to the park, tons of teenagers at the mall, and overall social, outdoor activities. On a side note, ever since COVID hit, I have noticed more people going to the park, walking, and riding bikes. 9/11. The 2000s took a very fast nosedive into nationalism and security state nonsense. We never recovered. I remember shopping at Claire's and Limited too. Juicy Couture was also popular back then. Tina and Britney absolutely ruling the pop scene. Avril Lavigne being the idol of those young ones that sorta wanted to be rebels but had to obey their parents. The emo phase. Razor phones. First iPods. Still own my first generation iPod Shuffle. Stuff like that. I graduated high school in '99. So glad all the dumb we did wasn't put on the internet. I drank Zima and thought I was cool. Also, drugs. But I do remember when social media started the MySpace era. Facebook was dumb back then. Mambo No. 5 was popular for some reason. I think a radio station where I lived played that song on loop for all of Nye in '99. LimeWire and Morpheus were popular, at least it was early 2000s for me, and this is where I gained a ton of ripped CDs, which I do still have. I remember Y2K was going to be the end of days. Then nothing happened. 20 years on and I'm realizing it just may have been the end. It's just really slowly happening. Spent most of it in a drug-fueled haze. What I can remember was big jeans and wholesome-esque rap. September 11, 2001 set off a lot of fear, anger, sadness and paranoia. Another question would be, what were the late 90s like? I say that 'cause in the US, 9/11 really did shake things up like no one had seen in the near past. I couldn't speak to the Vietnam era, but as soon as 9/11 came through, some of the hope of the new millennia went away. The service industry got hit pretty hard. It seemed like if you wanted a job pre-9/11, you could get something, anything. $10 an hour was enough in my city, not high-rolling but enough. I just remember a lot of stress about what's next, similar to what's been happening recently. In the late 90s, there was a booming economy that seemed like it would only go up. The restaurant I worked at took about a 20% hit from pre to post 9/11. Now, that seems small but then, it was big. Dumb things about traveling and security were new, and seemed intrusive. Before, anyone could roam the airport like a mall, even going up to the gate to see PPL away. You could literally show up 10 minutes before boarding and get in the plane. PPL weren't so ID conscious, like even for alcohol and stuff. So long as you looked old enough, no one gave a. Food was cheaper. Just found an old family recipe and one of the main ingredients was these special peanuts. I bought 6 bags in '03 for just over $10. I bought the same brand last night and they were $4 a bag. I remember by around 2005 or so, things seemed sorta normal again, except gas was really expensive. But at that time, it didn't impact me much. IDK, seeds of uncertainty that this Gen Xer hadn't seen, until the last years. Things are pretty scary to me right now. Just a bunch of dial-up noise in between the constant replay of all the small things. Everyone stop using paper plates and bags because save the trees. Now start using plastic everything because that's much better. Low-rise jeans, Discmans and the infamous pink chocolate combination in every piece of clothes you owned. The internet was so different. It had been graphical for a while but there was strangeness abound. It was the Wild West and large-scale capitalism hadn't monopolized the majority of it yet. Sometimes for fun you would just type random words with a .com to see if someone made a website for socks.com or weirdnoises.com. It seemed much more diverse and weird back then. Monetization has really homogenized much of the internet in my opinion. If one thing gets really popular, tons of other websites or YouTubers or whatever copy that style. The freak flags used to fly much more proudly. There was also an early add-on called Stumble Upon that would redirect you to a random website and it was incredible. I miss that world. It felt much more real and gritty. Not in a dangerous way, though sometimes in a dangerous way, but more like walking down a New York City street than the Disney Main Street the internet is today. No internet as you know it. Less websites, no YouTube, plus it was slow. Imagine trying to watch a 10-second clip only for it to take 5 minutes to load. Rugrats started too. Linkin Park was a thing. Straightened hair, tight pants, shitloads of angst, and even more eyeliner. It was the biggest group of cringe. I happily participate in RAR XDXXX Mikey Murder XXX. Baggy. LimeWire 4. Yahoo Chat for Cyber. The average white kid was listening to Korn or Limp Bizkit or some kind of new metal. If you were a white kid who listened to rap, people called you a. Everyone's pants were so baggy. Pants would only last a month before the threading on the leg opening would come loose, but some kids made a style out of this. Lot more machismo going around. Slurs were probably the most commonly used vocabulary words. No bullying or fighting over social media, so everyone had to do it face to face. Biggest difference is social media really. Back then the weird, awkward kid with the funny haircut and dress style who wouldn't say anything to anyone stayed exactly that. Nowadays that same kid would be on social media as a poster child for their sexuality, spewing political rhetoric, attempting to dox people who thought different from them, and be 1,000 times more popular than they would have been in 2000. Exposed thongs everywhere. It was a better time. I graduated in 2000 and 1995 to 2006 was the jam. I almost feel bad for kids today. People glow stick dancing while listening to Darude Sandstorm. No smartphones, but we had beepers. The last year's worth living in. Yeah, I feel like American teens already had a very different experience from the rest of us. And then 9/11 happened. And while we were still watching Britney and the Backstreet Boys, the US declared war on Iraq. Of all places, we were all like, what the? Question mark, exclamation mark, quote. Last breath of many of the things that made the 90s good. Saturday morning cartoons, internet being open and not monopolized by big tech, cell phones weren't taking over people's lives like they are now, rise of MP3 players like the iPod, DVD was new, brick and mortar movie rentals were still popular, etc. So much less anxiety back then. No social media, your phone was mainly only used to call, good content on MTV, and PS2 was king. The early 2000s. I very specifically recall all boys having a sudden obsession with robots. Bionicle, Robospine, Ratchet and Clank, a return of Transformers into the mainstream, the Star Wars prequels, tons of weird obscure mech-themed animes like Zoids and Beast Wars, all these robot dog toys, notably iDog, Dexter's Lab, Jimmy Neutron, I Am Legend, Daft Punk. If it was about robots, we wanted more of it. And we didn't care if it was robots. I had a Power Rangers toy from McDonald's as a kid despite not liking Power Rangers, but I thought it was sick because he was a huge robot. Napster and LimeWire were great. SpongeBob SquarePants and Fairly OddParents ruled. Nickelodeon Star Wars prequels and Lord of the Rings, and Harry Potter were always #1 at the box office. MySpace was the dominant social media platform. X-Play and Attack of the Show on G4 were awesome to watch after school. Teen Titans and Avatar, The Lost Airbender proved that cartoons could be great and meaningful as live-action shows. It was a time I miss every day. Speaking as an American, in the early 2000s, earnestness, self-awareness, and nuance had very little cultural currency. We were disconnected from reality, in every facet of life, from our pop culture to our economy. 9/11 was, somehow, not a wake-up call. It just threw us further into the facade. In a way, I think the current political situation is a division between those for whom the recession ended up being that long-needed wake-up call and those who couldn't turn away from the fantasy. But the internet was cooler. Very Wild West. Why, even then. There was a giddiness that came with how fast it was changing, knowing you'd found the next big music service or funny site, but knowing also that it would fold in a year or two. Imagine the crazy impermanence of it all, and then suddenly you've had a Facebook for 14 years. That mobile phones were becoming very popular, but popular music was getting worse. Can't even remember the early 2000s. Now the 1950s on the other hand. Make sure to like and subscribe while watching this awesome animal.